Hey, good evening. This is Not a Tame Sheep, part of the Black Sheep Theology Network. Believers in Jesus are called sheep, and we are supposed to be becoming more like Jesus. C.S. Lewis said that Aslan was not a tame lion, so I figured that Not a Tame Sheep was an appropriate name. Today we're going to discuss two different views of God that have dominated Western Christianity for over 1,000 years. To help you understand and differentiate between these two views, I'm going to discuss four topics that both views believe in. However, they have different understandings or perspectives on these topics, so they reach very different conclusions about who God is. The four areas are how God is incomprehensible, what God cannot do, the problem of evil, and necessary and contingent events. So let's start with the first view, that God is incomprehensible in his essence. So incomprehensible means that something cannot be understood. It's impossible to know or comprehend it. And we need to differentiate this from ineffable. Ineffable means that something cannot be fully expressed. So we can at least partially understand it, but we cannot fully understand it, is ineffable. So God is incomprehensible in his essence. Which would be like where the view of the Trinity comes from, that because we cannot comprehend the essence of God, God says that I am, that he reveals himself to us as the Trinity, and that while God is one in his essence, he's comprehended as or revealed to us as three persons. So the way that we know what God is by saying what God is not. So God is not finite, therefore God is infinite. God is not impotent, so God is omnipotent. And by saying the things that God is not, we can arrive at the things that God is. God does not lack knowledge, so he's omniscience. God doesn't lack understanding, so God is wisdom. So the essence of God is incomprehensible. So it's not wrong to say that God is incomprehensible. The difference just lies in how the rest of what God is understood. So let's talk then about how this first view looks at the problem of evil. So when we look at Genesis and when God created Adam, the difference between Adam and the rest of creation is that God created Adam a rational being in his image. He gave Adam rectitude of nature, which meant that Adam was able to not sin. He was able to refrain from sinning. So Adam was perfect and could do perfectly. And Adam needed a way to be able to disobey God in order to be free. So the way to do that would be to set up a test of obedience. The ability to disobey is how God gave Adam freedom. And the way God gave Adam freedom was God commanded Adam not to eat from one of the trees. So if you take a look at Genesis 2:16 and 17, God says, you are free, or you may surely eat from every tree. So Adam had the freedom to eat from every tree, and then he was commanded not to eat from one of those trees. So that would be the way that God gave Adam freedom, was he set up a way for Adam to be able to disobey him. If you want to read more about that, a couple of really good places are C.S. Lewis, The Problem of Pain, Chapter 2, and C.S. Lewis' favorite book of his own, Pure Landra, and that's Chapter 7 or Chapter 9, where he discusses about Adam in the garden. So the way this first view looks at it is that not even omnipotence can do what is logically contradictory. So when we look at other verses in the Bible, we see like all things are possible for God. And we also see that it's impossible for God to lie. So the way to solve this apparent contradiction is to say that a thing that is both the truth and a liar is logically contradictory. So God cannot be the truth. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Cannot be the truth, and therefore it's impossible for God to lie. So this isn't to say that God lacks power, because it would be like saying to an atheist, I won't believe in science until you can show me a scientist that can make a round triangle, to do something that's logically contradictory. So God cannot give Adam real freedom, the freedom to eat from any tree, and then withhold that freedom from him at the same time. So either God would have to do what is logically contradictory, or God would have to be a liar. And as Scripture says, it's impossible for God to lie. There's other things that Scripture says God can't do. His eyes are too pure to look upon evil, so because God is holy, he can't do that. In James, it says God doesn't tempt anyone. Again, that's God's holiness or his goodness. He wouldn't tempt people. It's not just to tempt someone to do evil. So those are things that Scripture says that God cannot do. And those things do not go against God's omnipotence, because even omnipotence cannot do what is logically contradictory. So the problem of evil says that if God is omnipotent, he could stop evil from coming into the world, and if God was good, he would want to. So the first view goes after the problem of evil on the omnipotence side, and says that the Epicurean problem of evil presupposes a logically contradictory view of the omnipotence of God. It's saying that God can give freedom to a creature and then withhold it at the same time and in the same sense. And that freedom was given in Genesis 2:16 and 17. So God could not stop Adam from sinning. So that is what God cannot do. And then the other thing is necessary and contingent events. So the fall of Adam was not necessary. It was contingent upon Adam's decision. So God being wise and all-powerful and good, the gift of freedom to Adam was a good gift. And when Adam chose to eat the forbidden fruit, God couldn't stop him. And when Adam did it, his will was free to do so. So that's kind of the nutshell of the first view, that God is incomprehensible in his essence, that God can't do things that are logically contradictory, that the problem of evil is wrong because it says that an omnipotent God could do what is logically contradictory, and there are contingent events that are contingent upon the choice of the creature. And the examples of that are Genesis 2:16 and 17, or we can think of other examples, like where God says to Israel, choose this day who you will serve. When he gives the choice to the creature it's up to them. It's contingent upon their choice. Okay, so then the second view, so we'll go to the French Confession, Article 1, where John Calvin describes God as incomprehensible and ineffable. So what Calvin meant when he said that God is incomprehensible was not that he was incomprehensible in his essence, because Calvin didn't conceive of God that way, because Augustine didn't conceive of God that way. So we'll come back to why God is incomprehensible after we talk about the problem of evil. So in the problem of evil, from the second view, is to agree that an omnipotent God could have stopped Adam from sinning. And the second view attacks the side that says that a good God would want to stop evil from coming into the world. So the second view says that yes, an omnipotent God could have stopped Adam from sinning, therefore it must be good that evil takes place. So the second view is going to go after the goodness of evil. It's going to say that it's good that evil takes place. So the way that this works out then is that God is incomprehensible in his goodness, which again you can look at the French Confession, where Calvin says that he calls the goodness of God incomprehensible. So it isn't just that the essence of God is incomprehensible, it's that the attributes of God are incomprehensible. The goodness of God is incomprehensible to us because we can't know how it is that God willing evil is good. And in the second view, God cannot give real freedom to any of his creatures at any time, or God is not omnipotent and sovereign. Therefore, everything happens as God ordains it, or you would say everything happens as God decrees it, or everything happens as God predestines it. Because God is in control. And therefore, there are both contingent and necessary events, but all events take place necessarily contingent upon what God willed from eternity past. So the first view says that there are things that are necessary. For example, for God to be omniscient, it's necessary that he knows all things. But God knowing something does not impose necessity upon it. So we can go to scripture where David is in the town of Keilah, and he asks God, will the citizens of Keilah hand me over to Saul? And God says to David, yes, they will. Well, if God knows that they will do it, in the second view, it has to happen. But in the first view, God can know both contingent events. So it's contingent upon David's decision. If David decides or chooses to stay in the town of Keilah, then the citizens will hand him over to Saul, and God infallibly knows that. But because David leaves, and that's David's choice, then the citizens don't hand David over to Saul. So there's a difference between necessary and contingent events between the first view and the second view. So again, just in the first view, it's necessary for God to be omniscient, to know all future contingent singulars, and things don't have to take place necessarily. So they can be contingent upon the choices of the creator, of the creature, and God is free to give real freedom to his creatures. In the second view, God cannot give real freedom to his creatures because then he wouldn't be in control of their choice. So what takes place is contingent upon what God chose, and all things take place necessarily. So that's kind of the nutshell of the two different views, the philosophical underpinnings of how these two views have conflicted over time. And this is what the Reformation was about, because Augustine invented this, what I've been describing as the second view, and he got this view of God then from Plato, and he rationalized that God could stop Adam from sinning, because Scripture doesn't say that. So he used rationalism to rationalize then that if God could stop Adam from sinning, that it must be good that evil happens. So Augustine realized that if God willed Adam to fall and the fall was evil, then God willed evil to happen. And if God wills evil to happen, and what God wills is good, then evil is good. So Augustine said, well, our rules, the rules of logic, do not apply to God, so that God can will evil, and it's good when God wills evil. That's why in the French confession, Calvin described the goodness of God as incomprehensible. We cannot comprehend the goodness of God. It's not that it's ineffable, that we can't fully express it. It's that we cannot understand it. It's unfathomable, unable to be comprehended. So this led Augustine to think of God as a form of will. And this view comes from Plato's Republic. And if you have read Plato's Republic, he talks about watchers in a cave. So he says that there are these people that are in the back of a cave, and they are in chains, and their head is bound, so they have to look at the back of the cave. And behind them, there's a fire. And so your head is stuck looking this way, there's a fire back here, and then people walk in between the back of your head and the fire, and the shadow is cast up on the wall. And these were called the forms. So one of these, a chair would be carried along behind you. You would see the shadow of the chair projected on the wall, and every chair would have a form of chairness. So what Augustine did is he used Plato to say that God is a form of will. So when you read the subsequent theologians that hold this second view of God, what I'm calling the second view of God for this explanation, they see God as a form of will. And because like when you take the chair across, every different chair is a form of a chair. So when the will of God is carried by behind you, you see a projection of the will of God. So the will of God can be a decreeing will, it can be an ordaining will, it can be a revealed will. So there's all of these different kinds of will. And so it's a form, God is a form of will. And then, because the ideal chair is behind you where you cannot see it, the ideal will of God is behind you. All you're seeing is a shadow of it, because you cannot comprehend the ideal will of God. So that will is a secret will. So that's why like Calvin titled one of his treatises, A Treatise on the Eternal Predestination of God and the Secret Will of God. So that's why there's all of these different wills, but there is still only one. There is still only one will. So Calvin says that God is simple, because Augustine thought that God is simple, but he is conceived of as a simple will. So God only has one will. It's just revealed to us in these different ways. But God still only has one will, and that's the way that you should talk about it, is that it's God's ordaining will. Everything takes place. It's all predestined by God from eternity past, contingent on what God wills, and all events in time take place necessarily. They are fixed and determined by what God willed. So when Adam fell, God ordained the fall of Adam. God decreed it. Adam had to fall because God willed Adam to fall, and it was good that Adam fell because God willed it, and God only wills that which is good. And that kind of explains, hopefully, the difference between the first view and the second view. And as you're reading different theologians or different discussions of theology, and you start running across these different explanations, you can kind of see where they came from in history, and then it's up to you to decide is do you believe in the first view or do you believe in the second view? So, yeah, I look forward to your comments and questions, and have a good day.